Hey, what's up? I've got the ELAC VELA BS403 in for review. These speakers sound really good. There is some lack of attack, maybe clarity in the mid frequency, high frequency area. But having said that, these speakers sound really good. The one thing that I like about them is that they're pretty neutral overall, except for that mid frequency, high frequency lack of attack. If you saw my recent review, I'm going to read some of my notes. If you saw my recent review of the JBL L52 Classic, you'll know that I harped pretty hard on the J. Jill's band's Centerfold song. In that, there's a hand clap that comes on it. Okay, so but there's a hand clap that's persistent from in that song. And with those JBL L52s, it was very sharp, aggressive. I did not like it. So when I fired up these speakers did not have that aggressiveness. It just sounded like a hand clap. Now, it doesn't sound like a good, well-recorded hand clap. I'm sure it's probably synthesized, but it didn't hurt my ears, and that was a nice welcome change. I also noted about the JBL L52s that there seemed to be a lack of snare. One of the tracks that I like to use for checking snare for attack, decay, and just the overall timbre of a snare is Ants Marching by Dave Matthews Band. It starts off with a snare. There's like 28 before it gets into the actual violin and the rest of the song. It's basically soloed. So you have the opportunity, number one, does it sound good? And number two, does it kind of make you blink your eyes a little bit? Because that will be the dynamic portion of it. Now, I don't mean blink your eyes and flinch as in, oh my gosh, it hurts. But does it have kind of a good solid attack? And these speakers have that. Even at low volume, they have a nice solid attack. Now, as far as bass goes, I don't think that I'm a bass head, but what I expect out of a speaker is good extension. I want, in an ideal world, I have a bookshelf speaker. I get 40 hertz extension because I might not plan to use a subwoofer with it. Okay, that's just kind of where I'm coming from, and that'll change from time to time, but it's kind of where I'm coming from with what I'm about to say. With the JBL L52 that I listened to previously, there was a strong, like a good punch around 100 hertz created by a mild Q bump in that region. After that bump, the response rolled off pretty quickly. So there wasn't a solid fundamental between 40 to 60 hertz for a kick drum, but there was just the harmonic of it that gave it that sound and kind of gave it a little bit of a textured sound to it. So when I'm listening to these speakers, I missed that 100 hertz bump. And at first I was just like, wow, these things don't have a lot of punch to them. I'm kind of surprised. I thought they would do better. They have a big old surround on that woofer. But then as I started listening a little bit more, I realized that it's not that they don't have punch. It's just that they don't have a mild Q bump that those JBLs had. And they actually have, these ELACs actually have better bass extension. I think in a room, most people are going to be able to get down to about 50 hertz. If you want lower than that, then you're going to need a subwoofer, but I think that pretty much goes without saying for most bookshelf speakers. Playing around with these speakers, initially I started off on axis aimed directly at me, and that's where I recommend you point them. I think if you point them away from your ears, you're going to lose some high frequency detail, and there's really not much to be gained in pointing them away from you. Now, if you have to point them away because it just fits the look of your room better, that's okay. Understand that you're going to lose high frequency above about 8 kilohertz. That's going to start rolling off. The mid bass punch, that 60, 50 hertz fundamental in a kick drum, is not there with these speakers pulled out away from the wall. Now, what I'm about to tell you will depend on your situation, but for the most part, it's true that when you push a speaker closer to a wall, there's boundary reinforcement. With these speakers, that holds as well. So you do get extra kick, thump, punch from that kick bass region, but in my room, it also comes off as bloated, resonant, and rather boomy. So I didn't like that. I started off with the speakers about 3 feet out into the room. Then I put them right next to the wall, and that's what I didn't like. So then I brought them out by about a foot. So now they're about maybe a foot, foot and a half off the back wall from the front of the speaker. That relieved some of the muddiness. It still kept some of the bass, but I still didn't care for that muddiness. So I actually wound up bringing them further out into the room. Now, when I do that, I'm sacrificing the lower bass, but I'm also not sacrificing mid-range detail, and it does sound like there's more depth. Now, I'll probably need to create an entire video dedicated to how close should you place your speakers to the wall. Some of it is going to be subjective, and then some speakers are designed to be placed closer to a wall. These speakers don't have an extended bass shelf response, and they don't have a lack of baffle step compensation, which indicates to me that these are designed to be brought out into a room. The only benefit that you get by putting them closer against the wall is, again, you get more of that mid-bass attack, but in my opinion, at least in my room, it came at a cost of resonant boomy bass. These are a typical size bookshelf speaker with a 6-inch aluminum paper sandwich cone woofer and what they call a handmade Jet 5 folded ribbon tweeter, and they say for lightning fast response and wide dynamic range. Well, we'll see about the dynamic range shortly. Lightning fast response, to me, honestly, just kind of comes off as marketing lingo. With an average sensitivity of about 84 decibels, I think it's 84.3 is what I calculated, and an impedance that kind of dips down below 4 ohms in some cases, you may find that you need a bit more amplifier power for these particular speakers. I was using these with an amplifier capable of about 100 watts. I was getting levels of 80 to 85 decibels at about 10 feet away in an 18 by 14 by 9 foot room rather easily, but that was on the higher end of the amplifier's output capability. If you have a large room or you're sitting further away, then you may need more power than 100 watts. Soundstage radiation was nice and wide. It was about plus or minus 60 to plus or minus 70 degrees, depending on the frequency, because it kind of does bounce around a little bit. I like that. I tend to prefer a speaker that has about 60 degrees, at least for a portion of it. So 120 degrees for the front hemisphere coverage. So that's what 60 degrees is. Plus or minus 60, 120, plus or minus 70, 140. That's kind of sitting right in that region where I personally like. Speakers that are less than that, to me, can sound a little bit narrow. Maybe, for example, a horn speaker might be about 30 degrees, plus or minus 30 degrees, or plus or minus 40 degrees. So it might not sound quite as wide. I like a speaker that has a radiation width of the one that this one does at about, again, maybe 60 to 70 degrees plus or minus. All right, so now let's move on and talk about some of the data that I captured. First of all, the impedance. I mentioned earlier that it's nominal 4 ohm load. Sensitivity is kind of this little mid to low side. You're going to want some power, and here's the impedance for that. This is the on-axis response. You can see the average sensitivity is about 84.3 decibels. Now, here's the thing, right? Like, everything looks good except for this dip and this peak right here. But these hold true for the CEA data. So you can actually equalize this response. I'm going to show you what I mean when I say that. With about 2 bands, you can do a lot of good on this speaker, and in my opinion, it really makes a world of difference. What I did was I chose some frequencies, and here you go, 2420 hertz, about plus 5 decibels. That's a lot. You're going to take some headroom off your amplifier, so be careful if you use these suggestions. Q of 4, and then another one at 3.1, negative 4 decibels, and then a Q of about 5. And in doing that, let's get rid of this predicted. So this is your baseline. And then when you add in this EQ, this is what you wind up with. So it does smooth that transition region out. And in my opinion, it gives the speaker what it's lacking. And that's in terms of attack or dynamics. F3 is at 59 hertz. F10 is at 46 hertz. Here's the CEA data. And this points to, can I equalize the speaker or not? See how this dip on axis is going down, but all of these others are doing the same thing. So this shows me that it's in the crossover. And I don't even think this is a crossover problem per se. It looks like this dip may have actually been targeted on purpose. So now we get into the preference thing. I don't prefer a 4 decibel dip at 2.5 kilohertz. I like that to be more neutral. In general, I like my speakers to sound more neutral. Then there's this peak right around 3.1 or so kilohertz. I would want to bring that down. Now, I can't tell you that I heard any issues directly associated with that, because to me, I think it was more about this dip and then this peak. Here's the estimated interim response at 0 and 30 degrees. Both of them look like they follow along pretty well. And it's interesting to note that the 30 degrees off-axis response trends pretty well to the on-axis response. The reason that is because of the wide radiation. And you'll see that in a minute. But above about 10 kilohertz, where that tweeter is narrowing up, that's where there's more divergence between on-axis versus 30 degrees. And for those of you who don't know, this is what I mean. On-axis would be the black pointed directly at the listener. 30 degrees would be in red pointed away from the listener, basically lined up with the back wall behind them. Here's a line illustrating kind of my subjective take on what I heard, overlaid with the objective measurements for the estimated in-room response. And this is what I'm saying. This is kind of missing the attack and detail of certain instruments that I want to hear. Horns, brass, even vocal intelligibility to some degree is also lacking because of that. Here's the horizontal contour plot, about plus or minus 70 degrees throughout until about 10 kilohertz. So this is why I said that the estimated in-room response tracks so well in the high frequency until 10K, because at 10 kilohertz, that's where things narrow up. Vertically, make sure that you're aligned with the tweeter. Otherwise, you're going to experience some suck out sound through this crossover region, and things are going to not sound quite as right. Harmonic distortion at 86 decibels, and then at 96 decibels. Multitone distortion at full output shows that once you get above about 88 decibels and then you jump to 96, there's a pretty strong difference here. There's about maybe 10 decibels in distortion. So you're going from 1% to 3% almost at about a 10 decibel swing, or roughly actually 8 decibel swing. And that's interesting to note simply from the perspective of, okay, this kind of gives me an idea that at some point the speaker's starting to run out of gas. Now, in my opinion, based on this 3% distortion threshold that I personally use, and this really is a sliding scale, I understand that, but for me, I like to put it on a graphic so I can quickly judge a speaker by its distortion metrics. For that reason, I think it's okay, but it does have a little bit of an issue around 800 hertz or so. I didn't hear that. What happens if you use a subwoofer? Well, let's go back. Full range, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and then 80 hertz to 20 kilohertz. You do decrease your mid-range distortion some if you cross over at around 80 hertz, assuming a brick wall. What about compression? Compression actually looks pretty good for the speaker. You're within about a decibel. Actually, you're well within a decibel above maybe 100 hertz. Below about 80 hertz is where that woofer excursion starts to be exceeded if you go to 102 decibels. So I would say for this speaker, it's probably on the better side of normal for a bookshelf size speaker, especially through this higher region right here. Now they talk about transients, I think, and dynamics with using this particular tweeter. You know, I can't say that every tweeter that's like this is going to perform better in terms of transients and things like that. But I will say that when you have low compression for the higher frequency, then that to me is an indication of good transient capability. So that does it for this review. I want to thank ELAC for sending this my way for a review. Overall, I think it's a good speaker. I just wish I could fix, I could go in and fix that dip and that crossover. It looks like it's done on purpose. It doesn't look like it's a bad crossover design in regards to somebody didn't know what they were doing, because we see that from time to time. In this particular case, it looks like it's very intentional and it's voiced that way on purpose, but my preference is not to have that kind of voicing. So I would change that. Everything else about the speaker, from the looks to the sound, is really good. I think it's a really neat looking speaker. If you own these speakers, I would be curious to know what you think. And do you kind of hear the same things that I mentioned? If you're interested in helping this channel out, you can do so a couple different ways. One would be at patreon.com/Erin's Audio Corner. You can join me there for up-to-date information, behind the scenes footage, early videos, early data, things like that. I definitely appreciate all the support I get there from my patrons. Man, I can't tell you how much it means to me. If you're interested in purchasing these speakers, you can do so through my affiliate link. I'll have it in the description in the comment section below. Click on that link, buy the speakers. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it helps me out with a small commission fee. And if you don't want to buy these speakers, just please click any of those generic affiliate links that I'll have down there for Amazon, Audio Advice, Crutchfield, Samsung, Best Buy. There's others. I would certainly appreciate that. With all that said, I am out. I will talk to you all later. Take care. Peace.